My name is Beth Smith and I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at the Zoological Society of London, but I'm pretty fresh out of my PhD at Nottingham Trent University, so that's what I'm going to talk about today. My PhD research was all about livestock guarding dogs and how they interact with wildlife in the Carpathian Mountains of Romania. So to talk about that in a bit more detail, so first of all, what is a livestock guarding dog? So a livestock guarding dog is a special breed of dog that's used to guard livestock from large predators. So they're typically these big breeds of dogs that shepherds will use to guard their livestock, typically sheep and goats, from, say, wolves and bears in Europe, or maybe even cheetah or leopard in somewhere like South Africa. So there's a bit of a conservation narrative around using these dogs. Basically, the idea that typically what's happened in the past is that large carnivores have been quite heavily persecuted and killed because of their taking of livestock and possibly a danger to human lives. But if we can use something like livestock guarding dogs, which reduces the incidence rate of that happening, so reduces the number of livestock that are lost and killed by predators, that we might be able to help people live alongside predators and basically reduce that persecution. And that's great, but what my research basically looked at was taking the idea of these dogs as being free-ranging domestic dogs. And actually, even though we have all of our pet dogs in our houses, and so we don't typically think of them as being a danger to wildlife, actually there's quite a lot of growing evidence that dogs just out about in the countryside, especially when they're free-ranging on their own, can have some pretty significant impacts on the co-occurring wildlife. So my entire PhD was basically looking at how these dogs interact with wildlife and what effects they have, either positive or negative, on the other animals that they're sharing the habitat with. And I did that by attaching GPS tracking collars to the dogs, which basically send a signal to a satellite and let me know where the dogs are every 5 minutes. I also deployed camera traps, so these are motion and heat sensitive cameras that take a picture when an animal or a human walks past the camera. And I also collected dog scats. So dog poo. You can't really, as a biologist, ever get away from working with some kind of animal poo at some point. So I basically collected lots of livestock guarding dog poo, and I looked through it to see what was in there, to see if there were any wildlife remains. And from all of these different methods, I could get a good picture of whether the dogs were staying with the sheep, whether they were chasing wildlife, consuming wildlife, and then also how wildlife responded to the presence of these dogs. So using the pictures on the camera traps to see if they were still using the areas where the dogs were, or whether the dogs were basically chasing them and preventing them from using that habitat. So a typical day in the field during my PhD fieldwork was a lot of driving, actually. It takes a long time to get up into the Carpathian Mountains to those high altitude pastures. So we maybe do a 2 to 3 hour drive up to see just one shepherd. So they typically are on these high altitude pastures and they stay there all summer as well. So they're up there all the time in these little huts. So we would drive up there, probably go for lunch with them, sit down, have a chat. I would write down some information of like how they managed their dogs, what they said their dogs' behaviour were. Then I would attach the GPS collars to the dogs and then spend, say, an hour or two looking around that pasture to collect dog scats. And then when we were doing the camera trap work, so when we were deploying these cameras into the forests, that would also be a lot of driving around all day, and also a lot of hiking to get to the more remote sites, and basically putting cameras onto trees or collecting memory cards out of those cameras so that we could then go through the images and see what wildlife had passed the camera that day, which is always fun to see. So you might not think it would be too unexpected to see wildlife when you're doing field work, but actually it's quite unusual to see like lots of wildlife when you're out about, especially in the Carpathian Mountains. So for me, something super exciting was just whenever we got to see any wildlife when we were out in the mountains. There's just so much forest, it's so pristine. there's just so much habitat for those animals to basically hide in, that you don't actually get to see them very often. And I did get to see a couple of brown bears, which was really cool, as well as lots of chamois and red deer, badgers. Yeah, it's always nice to see wildlife. So typically to do a PhD, to be a PhD student, you would have to have an undergraduate degree and a master's degree. You can often get away with not having a master's degree. It really depends on how much experience you have and the PhD project itself. I personally think that having a master's is quite useful. It gave me time to reflect on all of the different things that I was interested in and just gain some more skills before I went into the PhD. I think now that I've finished the PhD, if I was to meet my younger self, maybe first year of PhD, the advice that I would give myself is to just try and enjoy it. It does come to an end, which in some ways is great. And then in other ways, like you will miss it eventually. You will miss that really cool, fun fieldwork and research that you were doing. So even in the hard times, just keep pushing through it and just really try to enjoy it. So like I said, I'm now a postdoctoral researcher at the Zoological Society of London, and I absolutely love my job, but you know, there's a part of me that really misses being out in the Carpathian Mountains chasing livestock guarding dogs and wolves and bears around. So yeah, just enjoy everything that you do while it lasts.